Thank you so much, Vin. It is truly great to be here. I've been given exactly 12 minutes to sketch out the future of New York. You just took 7 seconds. Building a stadium on the west side of Manhattan is easier. Now, I hope we can all agree by now that the leadership of the city is probably the single most important factor in determining our fate. Would our city be anything like the city we love today if Ed Koch hadn't reestablished fiscal credibility and embarked on rebuilding scarred neighborhoods through his remarkably far-sighted housing plan? Or if Rudy Giuliani hadn't attacked crime with this stubborn determination that he was so well known for? How different would this city have been but for Mike Bloomberg's special ability to repair the wounded city after 9/11, make education his personal priority, and initiate massive physical renewal through rezonings, redevelopment, and sustainability. So any prophecies about the future must first begin with the question of who will be our next mayor? Put differently, we should ask ourselves, what do we need to be convinced about our next mayor and his or her successors to ensure that our future is as bright or even brighter than our present? I would argue that there are only 3 basic questions that we need to ask. First, does he or she truly understand what makes New York unique in an increasingly competitive world? Now, I travel a lot. I see cities all over the world trying to be like us. They want to take our jobs. On many levels, global competitiveness is a zero-sum game. That means that we have to be honest about the industries we can compete for and those we can't. Nostalgia for the glory days of manufacturing held us back from developing our waterfront for decades. And yet, as we have proven over the last decade, there are many areas where we can build our job base with smart focus on building on our real strengths, including tourism, film and television production, life sciences, and most recently, technology. But we all know we don't live in a vacuum. Our costs are high. The cost of living, the cost of construction, especially taxes. Nearly everything we do to push up our relative costs is going to undermine our competitiveness. But we have one advantage over every other city, which is best illustrated by something a Japanese banker once told me. He had run his bank's branches in London, in Sydney, in Paris, and a few other cities. But he said New York is by far his favorite city. Why? I asked. He paused for a moment and then smiled. Because it is the only city where when I walk down the street, people ask me for directions. Of course, what he meant is, no matter who you are, no matter what you look like, we New Yorkers assume that you are one of us. We are without doubt, the most open city in the world. As a result, we attract strivers and optimists from everywhere who come here to fulfill their dreams, each producing, as E.B. White famously said, as much heat and light as Consolidated Edison. That energy powers the city, produces the jobs, and makes us the meeting place of the world. In 1642, there were already people from 18 different nations living here in relative harmony. Stonewall happened here. We've always been on the vanguard of women's rights. Why were we the only major city that escaped riots in the 1960s? If we begin to send signals, any signals, that we are not going to remain the most open city in the world, I can guarantee you we will lose our edge. The second question is, does he or she fervently believe in what I call the virtuous cycle of the successful city? We are a remarkably compassionate city. We believe that we need to help those in need, that we have to make the city more affordable, that we have to provide the tools for people to capitalize on opportunity. All of that requires money. That's why our leaders have to truly get, and then they have to effectively manage the virtuous cycle. It starts with the core belief that growth is good. That the additional resident, business, or visitor generates net new revenues, which, if invested wisely, enhances the quality of life, which in turn helps to attract more residents, businesses, and visitors, thereby perpetuating the cycle. A successful leader of our city has to understand that you first have to make money before you can spend money. And then, of course, money has to be invested wisely in quality of life, in safety in schools, in transportation and the environment, in making the city cleaner and more fun. Investing money wisely requires organizing and managing the government to get things done, and having the skills to rigorously analyze investment and return, which is always defined in more than dollars, and over the long term. Over the first 10 years of the Bloomberg administration, the population of the city increased by 240,000. The number of visitors increased by 15.6 million annually, and the number of jobs increased by 146,000. Partly as a result, over those same 10 years, revenues increased by $24 billion, paying for a 49% increase in the parks, culture, housing, schools, police, and transportation budgets, all of which help to attract more people. But we should never forget how quickly the virtuous cycle can go into reverse and how disastrous the consequences can be. That will happen when we cease to become business-friendly and when we think about spending money before we figure out how to make it, especially on public employee benefits. The competition between public employee benefit costs and quality of life will be the central challenge of the coming years. Failure to acknowledge it and deal with it will condemn us to decline. The third and final question we need to ask of a candidate for mayor is, does he or she have the vision and the imagination to fuel this city, and then the courage and decisiveness to get things done? Central Park, the Brooklyn Bridge, the subway system, Lincoln Center. This is a city of big leaps that take us in new and exciting directions. Over the past 10 years, we've rebuilt, rezoned, and refashioned huge swaths of the city. Rail yards are becoming New York's next great neighborhoods. A rail line has become New York's next great park. A military base will become New York's next great park. We have reclaimed our formerly decrepit waterfront for housing and recreation. Roosevelt Island will become the intellectual center of a burgeoning tech industry. We are not a city that plays small ball. It isn't just about taking big leaps. We need to know that our leaders understand that for New York to stay ahead of the competition, we have to be bold, and we have to occasionally be disruptive, and we have to take chances. So what should we do? First of all, we should extend the achievements of the Bloomberg administration by knitting new connections among emerging communities, amenities, and institutions. For example, we should revisit the Santiago Calatrava design gondola connecting Brooklyn Bridge Park, Governor's Island, and Battery Park. With walk-on, walk-off service to Brooklyn and Manhattan, Governor's Island can become more than a park. It can be a hub for another emerging industry like global health. Brooklyn is hot. It's Queens' turn next. Light rail running along relatively underutilized Vernon Boulevard and Kent Avenue would link all of the emerging communities along Queens and Brooklyn waterfronts with each other and with the number 7 and L lines. Adjacent to Long Island City is the Sunnyside Yards, a huge swath of rail yard that forms a scar through the middle of Queens. For years, planners have dreamed about Sunnyside Yards, but they have been frustrated by the fact that the cost of decking over it isn't justified by property values. That has changed. In Long Island City, thousands of new apartments are being occupied. New hotels are opening, and its attractiveness as an office destination has been affirmed by new tenants such as JetBlue. So, let's start by decking over a part of the rail yards and creating a real transportation hub that connects the 6 subway lines, the Long Island Railroad, and Amtrak. Then let's borrow an idea from Governor Cuomo and move Javits to Queens. This time, though, to a location that is 1 or 2 subway stops from Midtown. Now, I know that some will complain that it isn't Manhattan, but you know, London's convention center is in a formerly remote industrial part of the city. You could pay for a big part of it by selling Javits land on the west side, which is far more valuable today because of the extension of the number 7 line. And we could draw a much wider array of conventions to less expensive hotels in Long Island City. We could accommodate a huge retail center and tens of thousands of residents to one of the most transit-friendly parts of New York. Sunnyside Yards could even be the key link in a fast train from Manhattan to LaGuardia, which would keep us competitive with other world cities. You know, it could even be a site for a temporary Olympic stadium. But I leave that to future visionaries. Big visions like this are what have defined New York, but they don't happen by accident. They take guts and imagination. They require an intuitive understanding of what are New York's unique advantages in a competitive world. They demand the skill to generate the revenues so that we can afford to be the kind of city we aspire to be. We all of us need to demand that our leaders meet that standard. If they do, can there be any doubt that we remain the world's greatest city? Thank you very much.